So without further ado, I'd like to kick things off tonight by welcoming our moderator, Larry Gulko, former AMA Boston president, actually. And Larry is a brand architect and strategist, executive coach, and growth advisor. He created Brand New Day, the only brand building and strategic marketing retreat designed for management teams looking to take their brands to the next level. Larry founded and moderates the annual CEO Brand Leadership Roundtable with the Harvard Business School Association of Boston. Finally, he and Roger Berkowitz, CEO of Legal Seafoods, host a podcast called Name Brands with CBS Boston. Larry, welcome, and I'll turn things over to you to introduce tonight's guest speaker.
Thank you, Meg. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's even more of a pleasure to have Nigel with us. As you know, Nigel was the CEO of Dunkin brands for around 10 years, and about a year ago he became the executive chairman. So it's really it's fabulous having him tonight. And Nigel, I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule. I know you're busier now than you were when you were CEO to be with us tonight. So I really appreciate it.
Happy to be here, Larry. Thank you.
Yeah. So and I love the picture in the back. We will touch base on your football team in London later on during our conversation. But Nigel, I want to start off with a quote that I saw that you said a while ago, and it says here, "I have learned that the CEO position trains you to always think beyond the immediate issue at hand, or as I call it, the power of anticipation." Can you share with me your insight in this quote?
Yeah, I can. I mean, I think when I look back, it was really from Blockbuster, and just to quickly tell the Blockbuster story, I was there for 10 years. I started in the UK after leaving Burger King. I moved up from running Europe to being the number 2 position, which was the president COO. Lots of interesting things happened during my time at Blockbuster. It's interesting when I think back, Blockbuster was the first to try and copy video, games, and music. So they had this machine when I got to the company in '94, where you went in, you put in a game, went through the machine, and out came another game. It's same with music, same with video. So it's a very innovative company. That got squashed by the music industry because they said, we don't want people copying. Mm-hmm. Net result, the music industry had the problem we all know about, where it lost all the customers, it lost people buying music, because Napster came along, illegal downloads. So one of the things I always say, if you create a vacuum, someone will fill it. Right. And in this case, it was illegal filling. So anyway, I moved up, came to the States, and in about 99, Netflix appeared. We tended to think of them as yet another internet bubble associates, if you like. But they came to see us in 2000 and they said, "Do you want to buy our product, which is effectively DVDs by mail, the red envelope, and the software that goes with it?" I wasn't actually in the meeting, but I will take responsibility. We said, "Well, how much do you want?" And they said 50 million. So they were removed very quickly. And the next few years, we developed Blockbuster Online. And it was very successful. It took a lot of share away from Netflix. One of the reasons was that we integrated the stores. Now, just to give the time perspective, I left Blockbuster at the end of '94. We launched it in August '94. It was taking share, and it kept taking share for a couple of years later. And then Carl Icahn, the very famous corporate raider, came in, and he said, "Wow, all this internet stuff is for the birds. We don't want to do that. We're going to focus on the real heart of Blockbuster, which is the stores. And guess what? We're going to get associated with Circuit City and buy them, and then we're going to buy Hollywood Video." Net result, none of that happened.
Right.
And he underinvested in the internet, and 5 years later, Blockbuster was dead. So taking that, one of the things I've always thought about is, how do you see that disruptor coming along? Mm-hmm. How do you look around corners? How do you think about the future? And I called it the power of anticipation, but that was driven by another story, Larry. When I was in HR in 1977, 78, I worked at Massey Ferguson, and I read this great article. It was about bus drivers in Holland. and they found that the bus drivers that had 0 accidents were the people 2 or 3 vehicles ahead. They were looking 2 or 3 vehicles ahead. So they were anticipating what other cars were going to do. So I put the two together and I called it the power of anticipation. And I think one of the things you need to keep looking at, who are the companies going to disrupt you, who are going to challenge you, and keep a strong eye on the competition.
Well, I always tell clients, put a team together, maybe 4 or 5 people for 6 months. And the best thing you can do, it falls in line with what you just said, Nigel, is what can you do to make your own product obsolete? Because if you don't do it, somebody else will. It's like Jack Welch always said, if you don't change the game will change you. You mentioned something about HR, and I'm really fascinated, Nigel. You started your career in the early days in human resources with Burger King. And I know that you've talked about the fact that HR gave you a foundation to go into management and operations, but maybe way back then you weren't thinking about being in the C-suite. So can you share with us the value of the HR perspective of your foundation and how it really enabled you to keep going up the corporate ladder, with HR being that core fundamental or core experience with how you basically treat, motivate, inspire people as a leader?
Before I do that, let me just go back to what you said. When you write a book, you never know what people are going to think and what they like.
Right.
The phrase that most people like out the book, I would never have guessed it, is imagine your own demise.
Right.
Which is exactly what you just said, Larry.
Mm.
So back on HR. So I was actually in HR from 1970 to 1991. I worked for a big company called Grand Met, which is effectively now Diageo, and they bought Burger King. I moved from the other side of the pond to Miami. That's why I'm a Dolphin fan. By the way, the Patriots are behind us right now. I just want to make that point. And also the Heat. I think we beat the Celtics. Right. Anyway, I was down in Burger King. I was the head of HR. And so the first part of the question is, what does HR bring? Well, I did a session yesterday to about 130 HR folk, and I think it's an incredibly strategic function. And one of the things I think is true is it's considered more strategic in the UK than it is here. Mm. Why the difference? Well, one of the things I first observed when I came to this country is HR people spend so much time administering plans.
Right.
So what I tried to encourage the HR folk to think about yesterday is to think strategically. Not only where's your company going, but they've got to be the person who's side by side with the CEO. And I think the pandemic has actually created a wonderful opportunity for HR people, because most of the challenges with people now are pretty extreme, and HR people have to be right at the heart of it. But I think the things they have to lead on is set great people standards, never compromise.
Right.
They have to be at the heart of the culture. I mean, even though I've written a book, The Challenge Culture, it's not really, you shouldn't necessarily go out and create the challenge culture. It's having a strong, positive culture that counts. And as I've always said, the HR people have to be side by side with the CEOs or the leaders or whatever organization it is. But one of the things that's so frustrating to people on boards these days is most HR people are not very strategic when it comes to compensation. And I think it goes back to what I said earlier about being administrators. So a phrase I had in yesterday's presentation is, be a compensation strategist, not an administrator. So I think HR is very important. It's even more important at the moment. And this is going to be bad news for your audience. When I was at Grand Met back in the day, they said the 3 important functions are the CEO, finance, and HR. Marketing people may disagree, but that was the way they looked at it back in the 80s, 90s.
So let me ask this question. You've been in franchising really a big part of your life, whether it be Blockbuster, Papa John's, Dunkin. So talking about HR and communications and inspiring people, what are some of the, and then we're going to get involved in Dunkin naturally, what are some of the biggest challenges of open line communications, engaging people, went in a franchise model versus having company-owned stores?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, besides the list you went through, out the blue in about February, I got approached by Blackstone to become the chairman of ServPro, which is 100% franchise and owned by Blackstone. So the trend continues.
Yeah.
I think. Well, I think the first thing I'll say about franchisees, and the word begins with F. I'm going to pause there, let people think. So franchise, and I always say they're very similar to another F I have, which is fans. We'll talk about that, I'm sure.
Right.
But fans and franchisees have one thing in common. They're incredibly opinionated because they invest in a brand. They invest in, obviously, the structure, in Dunkin's case, in the store, in ServPro's case, in all the equipment and the trucks that they have. And they believe they own their little kingdom. And as such, they have lots of opinions. So when I got to Dunkin, to answer your question in more detail, I found that the franchise relationships were terrible. There was an awful lot of litigation. So I spent a lot of time going around, talking, listening. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, that's obvious. But I think the key is active listening. And the first week I was there, I went to New York. I met with some franchisees. And afterwards, I said to the regional director, well, how did that go? Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Well, why? What did I do? You took some notes. And I think that's an important message, because franchisees are difficult to handle. But if you embrace them and include them and do things with them and don't just tell them what to do, which happens in a lot of franchise organizations, you can really win them over. And probably the best example, which again is in the book, is a whole chapter on how we wanted to sell our products into supermarkets and other retail locations and online. And our franchisees had seen this before. They didn't like it. So I came up with what I consider to be a win-win, which was to share the revenue 50-50. And we built that as a result into a $1 billion business. So I think it's listening, it's engaging, as you said, a lot of communications. I love franchising. It's not for everyone, because a lot of people don't like the non-stop pushback and sometimes criticism that you get.
Well, I find it fascinating because you mirror. Yesterday, I was watching an interview with Arthur Blank, co-founder of Home Depot, and he said that the most important ingredient, attribute of a CEO or a management team is to listen. If you don't listen, forget it. And he would say 96% of the people, he knows why they buy, but he wants to listen and find out why the 4% don't buy, because it's not get perfection, but you want to know why you don't buy. So I'm curious to know today, does Dunkin have about 14,000 franchisees in about 50 countries? Is that the scale number?
It's about 2,000 in, I think it's about 60 odd countries. I've lost track. I mean, one of the benefits of being chairman, I don't have to keep on top of all these facts. I leave that to Dave Hoffman, who's doing it.
Right. You just check in 2 hours every quarter and that's it, right?
Yeah, I'd like to believe that was true.
So tell me, the whole evolution of when Dunkin started, it's always Dunkin' Donuts. I know everybody on our call today are curious to know what thinking went on behind the evolution to drop the word donuts.
Well, I'll get my time all wrong, but it was about 2013, which was, no, it was probably 2014, 3 years after the IPO, which was 2011. Very successful IPO. We did very well. The consumer products, notably K-Cups, did very well. And then we hit a little bit of a doldrums. So went out, did a lot of, quote, listening with franchisees. And, we started to tweak our products, tweak our marketing, up our digital act, all the usual array of actions that you do when you're trying to improve the business. But we kept hearing that Dunkin' Donuts sounds a bit old-fashioned, and the image was somewhat as it was 1950.
Right.
So we did some research, and and we found that a lot of people in the US thought we should go to Dunkin. I mean, there was a lot of nicknames for Dunkin. Dunks was one that a lot of people use up here. And you've got to be careful. I think this is an important point, Larry. One of the reasons that I think I was pretty successful at Dunkin was I didn't come from Boston. I mean, yeah, I know I got a Boston accent now, but I didn't come from Boston. In fact, when I joined the company, I've been to Dunkin 3 times, and the last time I said I would never go again. It was so bad. So I came with this detached view, which is a bit like that helicopter.
Right.
You know, when you come outside a brand and you go in. So anyway, we were beginning to hear, particularly in our newer territories out west, that Dunkin was too East Coast, too Boston. We ought to change it. So we did some research and found us some validity, but it was a big risk. And I was really concerned about international, because in many of the countries in place, particularly in Southeast Asia, it was the original model. It wasn't the sandwiches you see now. It was really coffee and donuts.
Right.
But I remember I did a session shortly before I retired as CEO in Las Vegas, and I met with all these franchisees and actually asked them, in the international one, what do you think we should do? What's your view? We want your view. Help us make this decision. And they said, you got to modernize, you got to get up to date. And on the back of that, Dave Hoffman then came along, which I think is another lesson there. Have your successor ready. I know everyone says that, but I think my HR background made me absolutely committed to that. So we brought him in, he took it on. He became very enthusiastic about the whole project. And I remember going to the board one day, which I thought was going to be a little bit of a disaster, because many of them also came from Boston, and some have been in the PE companies that owned us previously. It all went very well. The research was very compelling. We knew it was a risk changing it. But if I look back, and thanks for the question, if I look back, that was probably one of the best things that's happened in my time with Dunkin. I mean, we've started to change the stores. We also put in things like the tap system, which is a bit like the pub.
Right.
Get all kinds of different coffee. I think it also helped us seem as modern. You know, the drive-through, I think, got reinforced. It was a great move.
Well, you know, I know that, and you've really localized it. Some towns you go into, it'll say like Wellesley runs on Dunkin or Quincy runs on Dunkin. So I think how you've kind of leveraged the America runs on Dunkin and localized it to a local town is really pretty cool. How was the receptivity differ from domestically when you decided to make the change and launch Dunkin, no Dunkin' Donuts? Was there a difference between the receptivity of the consumer domestically versus internationally, or was it basically everybody got in the bandwagon the same way?
No, I think that's a very good question. I think it's varied. Domestically, we've certainly done better outside of this area. I mean, I think you know, again, going back to franchising, our franchisees have done very well. For some of them, it was tough to change. Because you had to. It wasn't just a lick of paint and a change of a name.
Right.
It was a philosophy, and you know, we changed the whole store. We put the donuts on the front case. We brought the tap system in. In some places we had double drive-throughs. So it was a completely way of doing business, and it's worked, by the way, very well in the pandemic. But internationally, I think the franchisees, where this may be a surprise to many people, Dunkin, of the 2 brands internationally, was by far the weaker brand. I mean, Baskin is so much stronger than Dunkin. The problem was, what we're going to do about the Dunkin brand. And this was the answer. And I think the franchisees right from the start believed this was a way of either launching it in new countries or revitalizing what we have. But I think the issue has always been how you can get the very strong core Dunkin' Donuts fans, customers, which may be the same thing, and franchisees committed to the change. I think we're making real progress, but it was a home run outside of our home area.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting. When you and I talked a little while ago, I know we talked about, you know, we live in an on-the-go society, fast paced. And I know you once said something like, years ago, you called up Dunkin', you went in Dunkin', you go in your car, you got your donut and coffee. You actually went in, it came out, and you left. And then you did a drive-through, and that caused lines, and people have no time at all. And then you have made 2 drive-throughs, and then you're able to go on an app and get somebody. Some stores, you could have people come from the store and bring the donut order or the bagel, whatever it is, to your car. So I'm just curious to know, with today's pandemic, where the footprint is changing and the mindset is changing and people's patience is changing, what is Duncan doing now? How have you reacted to the pandemic in terms of culturally, and never mind being an on-the-go society, this whole pandemic has changed the whole landscape. So how has Duncan pivoted from since February to really, enhance the experience or understand the experience the consumer wants now, thinking current day challenges?
Well, I think firstly, it's not what I've done, it's what Dave Hoffman and the team, Scott Murphy, who runs the US, have done. They've done an awesome job. And, it's a little bit of luck. I mean, Dunkin's, in the best of times, is really about grab and go, drive through, as you say. I think it actually helped last year. We won the QSR drive-through award for speed. And Dunkin's all about speed. And probably the biggest reason why people don't use our app on the phone is simple, that you go in and sometimes they know exactly what you want. So it doesn't actually advance the ball.
Right.
But so I think I'd say we were well set up. And I'd say that a big competitor is, I've forgotten their name, it's a company that's from Seattle, but anyway.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's very expensive coffee, very strong coffee. You don't want it.
No. I see. I've even forgotten their name, Larry. So, but I mean, but Starbucks is a great company, absolutely great company.
Yeah.
And I think they were very focused on the 3rd place.
Yeah.
3rd place doesn't work so well in a pandemic.
Right.
So we had that little bit of luck. But what we did is we focused on the drive-through. We focused on simplifying the menu, which is interesting. My wife said the other day, let's go to fast food and get a salad. McDonald's? No. Go to Burger King? No. Wendy's has it, but not the other 2. So that's an example of how people have simplified the menu. So we really focused on the drive-through and drive-through speed. And right. I think we quickly realized that the car was a safe haven. You leave your home, you go, you stay in the car, you perhaps have your mask on, you'd reach out, you could pay before you get there. So there's very little touching. Now, here's an interesting story. Just before I finished being CEO, we were studying the numbers in the financial review, as you do. And one day we said, look, the drive-through stores are doing so well. And a quick number for you, over the last few years, we've had always, of our stores, about 60, 70% of drive-throughs. And in those drive-through stores, over 70% of the revenue goes through the drive-through. So the drive-through works really well. And we said, how can we help non-drive-through stores?
Right.
So we tried a few tests, didn't work. And then we came up with this concept called Curbside, which we actually took from some of the casual dining chains. Let's see if that could work. So as you said earlier, you order it on the app, you go and then you park in the spot. And I always remember we tested it at Natick, the store on Main Street, Natick.
Right.
And I said, to distinguish the parking spot, it needs to be a really dreadful color. So we came up with this bright pink so no one could miss it, and pink signs. Well, we tested it. It didn't work very well. 100 stores did the curbside.
Right.
The pandemic comes along.
Right.
Again, people want to sit in their cars. So that failed test suddenly became a winner. And we've now got thousands of stores, again, with no drive-through on curbside. So I think a lesson for everyone is sometimes you have to go back to go forward. So I think they were all the ingredients. I think we also, and I think the board was very instrumental here. The board was obsessed with digital, and we built on the foundation of a very strong app that we first put together in 2012.
Right.
Involved. We bought the app inside. In other words, it wasn't a third party management of it, which was a big decision because essentially we're a capital light company.
Right.
So I think a lot of things went, but probably the most important thing I've missed, you have to assure people that they're going to be safe. And I do work for lots of friends who got restaurants, and I'm always shocked how if you go on their website, you see pictures of tables close together. That's not what people want to see at the moment. They
Right.
want to see them socially distanced.
Right. Right.
All the things that you as a marketeer would see very easily.
Right.
I'm shocked that their website doesn't represent what 2020 is.
Now, so what you said basically, I was going to ask you another question, but you already answered it. It's how is Dunkin keeping the brand fresh and relevant? And you addressed it beautifully. I have a question for you. You know, here it is, Dunkin selling coffee and so forth, been around many, many years. As far as the Dunkin brand voice, I always ask companies, you know, what are you really selling? Like a while ago, when I was consulting with Harley Davidson, they make motorcycles, they're selling freedom. And Children's Hospital selling hope. And Disney selling happiness. And Life is Good is selling optimism or good vibes. If I ask you, I'm going to ask you anyhow, Nigel, what is Dunkin really selling? We know you do, but what is Dunkin really selling that people will perceive the Dunkin brand like no other brand in the space that you live in?
Well, I'd start off with Baskin. There's no doubt if you go around the world and see the strength of Baskin, go to places like Japan, Korea, it's happiness. I mean, the way I always described Baskin Robbins was I truly believe that Baskin Robbins is about young people sitting in the restaurant in normal times, enjoying their ice cream and the joy that comes out. And a phrase I've always used is romancing the flavors. I mean, you know, they've got all these flavors, 31 flavors, there's actually thousands, but you know, if you romance the flavor and you go into a Japanese Baskin, they're always describing exactly how that flavor is. Back to Dunkin', I think Dunkin' is much more about speed and people getting on their way. I'm not actually watching the chat, but I saw someone wrote about America Runs on Dunkin'. And I think that was well before my time. It was done by Hill Holiday.
Yeah.
And it's a great line. It's one of the, America's great lines, but it captures what we're about. We're about, you're going to work, you want to get something you like. And I think it is about speed that I describe Dunkin'.
Yeah. And I know you said that you want to be the beverage-led brand. Well, what does beverage-led mean?
Well, beverage, I mean, we are beverage-led. I mean, if you look at some of those Southeast Asian countries, they probably have something like 60% donut mix.
Right.
Donuts in the US is in the mid-teens. Sandwiches is in the low teens, but the rest are beverages. So we are already beverage-led. And to be fair, a lot of that started before my time. John Luther, who was the CEO before me, he did a lot of work on espresso. We reinforced the whole espresso presentation a year or so ago. In fact, last year, espresso drinks grew faster than any year in our history.
Right.
So it's about the breadth. But Dunkin', if you look at it, we're the market leader in iced coffee.
Right.
So iced, frozen plays very well for us. And then you've got obviously hot coffee, and then you've got espresso-based drinks. And I think we've now got the authority to put out a lot of different types of drinks. And that's been a constant focus. Beverage-led wasn't just something that came up in the last 2 to 3 years. It goes right back really to the IPO 2011.
Yeah. But that's interesting. You mentioned iced coffee. I think maybe a couple of years ago, I was driving in Dedham, and I was just one of these, you know, like, I don't know, funky moods, right? And I go by the Rotary in Dedham, the Dunkin', there's a big sign in the window. It says Girl Scout flavored Dunkin' flavored coffee, you know, mint, and the other one was the, I don't know, the caramel, whatever it was. And I know, like my wife always says, if you're going to waste calories or you're going to have an immense amount of sugar, at least do something you love. And I went in there and it was the mood, right? And I got a large Girl Scout flavored mint cookie coffee. And I'll tell you, close your eyes. It was amazing. I'm sure it was full of sugar and everything else. I want to ask a question is that how do you determine or how do you identify partners or companies, other brands to co-market like the Girl Scouts, like other brands? How do you identify who to market with? And also, you know, in terms of what, do they have a value system like Dunkin'? Do they share the same kind of culture? I mean, like today, even like ice cream, every ice cream has M&Ms in it or Reese's Pieces. It's across the board. So how do you decide who to co-market and incorporate into your brand?
No one's ever asked me that question. I don't really know how to answer it because I never got involved in it. I mean, it would come to me and I'd say, well, why are we doing this? And, you know, let's see the research. So I think you probably answered it yourself. I mean, it's probably companies with a good ethos, one that we felt we could add value to our product. Right. But partners are interesting. I mean, we've had a lot of success in recent times on TikTok with Charlie Emilio. Right. I mean, I've got 3 kids. One's 40, who works for Sky in the UK, and then I've got a 15-year-old, 13-year-old. I mean, they're obsessed with Charlie. And I'm pleased also to say that I'm on the board of Abercrombie, which also has Charlie. So I think you and you, Larry, you know much more about marketing than I do. I mean, I'm not really a marketing person at all, but I think what you have to do is segment your population. And one thing I'm always complaining about is that people don't think enough about the Gen Zers. They tend to do their research in companies from 18 and upwards. Right. You know, they even pick up old folk like me, 70, right? but they ignore the teenagers. And I think there is so much to be gained because I think that generation is going to save the world. You know, I hate to say, Larry, you and I have caused a lot of problems in the world, our generation. The millennials are trying to do a better job, but the Gen Zers, I think, are absolutely critical to the future of the planet. Yeah. But I don't think companies take them seriously. Now, what I do know, and I've probably got a biased population that I see, most of them love Dunkin'. Right. They don't talk about that other brand. Yeah.
So how would you define the last question about Dunkin'? How would you define who was a Dunkin' customer? What is their buyer motivations and how have they changed over the last, I don't know, 5 or 10 years, or have they really changed?
Yeah, I think they've moved a bit younger. The Dunkin' customers always been much more affluent than people think. I think they're people who are looking for consistency, looking for speed. They're usually working people on the go. I mean, you know, we had these kind of cartoons in the stores for a long time that really show people moving fast. So I think that's the general demographic, but they tend to be slightly above average income. Very strong split between men and women, with women slightly higher, which always surprised me, but it's true. I think it has evolved over the years. I think now we're seeing a real evolution on the back of the digital push that we've had to a younger group, which I think is good for the future of the brand.
Okay, Nigel, there right now, Meg, why don't we do a little poll question, and I'll let you take it from there. And we have a question here that says, what's your go-to Dunkin' order? Coffee, specialty coffee like latte, donuts, muffins, bagels, and breakfast sandwiches. I'm just curious to know the audience we have tonight, Nigel, what is their go-to product at Dunkin'? So if everybody can kind of click on their go-to, we'll wrap this up really pretty fast, and I want to share it with Nigel and get his reaction. How's that, Meg? All right?
Yep, we'll just launch the results. Hang on.
Okay. Wow, the largest percent naturally is coffee, 60%, and breakfast is second, followed by donuts, and especially coffee like lattes, 8%. So Nigel, the coffee I think is a given, but I'd be curious to know, because I know you're doing a lot of promoting. I was in Dunkin' today, but the lattes, are you surprised specialty coffee is such a low percent? And if it is this poll representative with the actual figures, the numbers you have at Dunkin'?
I think it's very similar. So what's interesting about it, and I'll write down these numbers, or if you can send it to me, be even easier.
Yeah.
And how many people did the poll? Do we know?
About 100.
Yeah. So I mean, I think I said earlier about the donuts and the breakfast sandwiches. They're kind of what I would have expected because you throw in muffins and bagels, so that's about right.
Right.
Specialty coffee, I would be slightly disappointed to your point. I wonder how many people, Larry, would take hot or iced coffee. I don't know if it's possible to do another question.
Well, I personally, I'm an iced coffee drinker. I mean, I drink hot coffee too, but if I have a choice, not in the winter, not in January, February up here in Boston, but other than that, I'm an iced coffee. Meg, if you want to just put another poll question, we'll do it later on. You're saying, Nigel, what percent enjoy hot coffee versus iced coffee?
Well, the reason I say that, Larry, is two facts. When I came to New England, I'd never tried iced coffee in my life.
Really?
I mean, remember I said I was the outsider looking in.
Right.
And I still struggle with it. And then you've got other variations of it, like cold brew.
Right.
So I think it'd be quite interesting for those who voted coffee, whether it's iced or hot.
Okay. Meg, try doing that, and we'll come back to it in a few minutes. So Nigel, let's move away from Duncan. I want to talk about CEO leadership and your style. I have a quote here. The former chairman of Disney said, I believe we have the opportunity to fashion an organization where everyone's involved, everyone's fully engaged, and everyone's a player. So I'd like to know, how do you, I mean, again, not now, because now you're the chairman, but when you were CEO, how did you ignite, spark, inspire your employees to quote unquote live the Dunkin brand, to execute the experience that you wanted them to execute? How do you, and I know it probably goes back to your HR days, but how do you build teams so they live and breathe it, and more importantly, they know how their role contributes to the success of the company?
Well, obviously in a franchise organization, that's difficult because we're actually managing an organization, not groups of people. So going back to your earlier question, it's a lot easier culturally to have corporate stores like Starbucks do, because you can influence people directly. And that was always somewhat of a frustration. And if you think about it, if you've got around the world 2,000 franchisees, you've got 2,000 cultures, and above that, you've got a Dunkin culture. So to be honest, all we can really influence are the people at Dunkin, and hope indirectly they influence the franchisees. So right from the start, I came in with this philosophy that's all described in my book, but it's basic. To describe it simply, I tried to be me, which is this Brit with a funny accent. I try not to take myself too seriously. It's interesting. The CEO at ServPro said to me recently, Nigel, you're funny. And I took that as a compliment, because
endearing.
Because I think to take life too seriously is important. So you have to be approachable. You have to know what people are thinking. So I ran these programs called Coffee Chats, which very simply, we ran them regularly. We had a lot of feedback. You needed to make people feel safe. They were a diagonal slice of functions, more junior employees. And we'd ask people to talk about what's going on in the company. It wasn't just questions, it was a discussion. But the problem always is getting people going and encouraging them to go into difficult areas. So I used to give them examples of questions they could ask. I say, this is going to be a bit like a talk show on TV. So you can talk about sales, you can talk about Baskin, you can talk about new products, you can talk about our franchisees, or you may want to go down some controversial routes. So, you know, when Harvey Weinstein was front and center in the newspaper, I said, let's talk about how people act at Dunkin. You know, let's talk about, you know, do we have any problems? Do we have any issues? Or another one, there was a lot of rumors about 3 or 4 years ago of some company was going to buy us. So I said, let's talk about acquisition rumors. You have to open people up to let them to have the safety that they can say anything. That was very successful. I learned a lot. We changed policies, but I'm a communications nut. Now, I think the pandemic has moved most companies down the communication path. And here's an interesting thing. Back in about May, I did a round table with a bunch of CEOs and chairmen of franchise organizations. And there was a franchise organization, never heard of it, fairly small. But they taught me something, because they said, we don't just have group communications of marketing or the people in the field or whatever. The whole management team has been given the job of talking to individuals.
Mm-hmm.
That was very powerful,
Mm-hmm.
because you
Right.
think about what's happened in the pandemic, and I know I'm slightly going off the question, but people have had mental health issues.
Yep.
People have been isolated.
Yep.
They don't have that human contact that we all really thirst for.
Mm.
So we did a lot of communications at Dunkin. We got a lot of active involvement through questions and comments. I think we did a lot of video work.
Right.
So, just to take the tagline, America runs on video.
Right.
And we truly made communications the cornerstone of the way we acted. I think we also embraced the challenge culture, where everything got challenged.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an interesting book that people ought to read. I mean, Netflix effectively have done a spectacular job after they took over from us at Blockbuster. But there's a book called No Rules by Reed Hastings,
Mm-hmm.
which talks about the culture at Netflix. Netflix is a very open challenge culture style place where everyone's allowed to comment on individual performance and what the company is doing. But there's another book that talks about the downside.
Right.
One of the issues I think people misunderstand with the challenge culture is you can't do it every minute. It can't be nonstop. It can't be irritating. It can't be confrontational. It has to be constantly positive. And I think when you work with franchisees who truly do question everything you do,
right,
I think it makes you much more willing to take on board different ideas, different ways of doing it, different methodologies. But it wasn't for everyone. And I remember a marketing person left after a long time at Dunkin. And I said to this guy, why are you leaving? I can't take it anymore. I can't take the franchisees. Well, what's wrong with them? They argue about everything. You can't implement everything. So he left and went to a major retailer, which I won't name. And within 10 months, he left. So I phoned him up and I said, so why are you leaving there? Well, the CEO decides everything. So I think that was an interesting thing, because I think a lot of companies are top down. We never were at Dunkin. I mean, if anyone accused me of being anything, I'd hate to think it was top down, because we truly try to get the right decisions through discussing it all the way through and letting everyone have an opinion.
Right. Nigel, and a couple of years ago, I know, because you and I were at Babson College doing a program together when you first published you published your first book, The Challenge Culture, Why the Most Successful Organizations Run on Pushback, where you share your management philosophy in business and describe your experiences in HR and so forth. Describe for us, what is pushback, and how do you encourage pushback?
Well, I have a diagram I use in speeches, which says, imagine you're here.
Right.
You've got a boss, so there's an arrow going up. You've got people below, arrow going down, and you've got all your colleagues in finance, manufacturing, whatever, there as well. You have to create a situation where they can challenge you and effectively push on you. That requires you to have, going back to our earlier conversation, great listening skills, great questioning skills, because pushback can be as simple as, see that?
Yeah.
I've got a new product here. What do you think of it? Do you think it could be designed differently? And encouraging people to come back to you and saying, well, I think it'd be better if you opened it up, or whatever it is. So you have to open yourself up, and many people in the audience may have done an really old tool called the Johari window. Did you?
Yeah.
And there's two measures, as exposure and feedback.
Right.
Exposure is where you open yourself up to receive information from others, and hopefully that helps you get better. And then there's feedback, where you have to be brave enough in a positive way to say, Larry, I don't think you're asking the right questions tonight. And then you get into a dialogue about it. So that is effectively pushback. But I think if you truly use the challenge culture in the right way, everything I do, I ask people for an opinion. I mean, I will write a slide, and Ruth, who, as you know, works for me, she's worked for me for 18 years in Dallas. She looks at my presentations. I say to her, okay, what's wrong with it? Pushback is relatively simple. It's not what people think is this aggressive, nasty. I hasten to add, tonight we were going to see some examples of pushback on the TV. It'd be interesting to see how the two people push back on each other, right? But the way I tried to do it at Dunkin, and I think it was a major reason for our success, was we were all part of a team. I tried to think of no hierarchy. We're all in this as one team.
So when you have these kind of meetings and you invite this little town hall meetings, whatever, when you were CEO, and there's Nigel, he's the CEO, I'm coming to a meeting, you know, do they feel intimidated? Not by you, they just be intimidated. I'm there, you know, I'm just saying somebody could perceive Nigel has all the answers. I don't have a wrong answer. How do you encourage people to speak up, interject, share your opinion, and don't hold back? You know, don't hold back, because I want to hear from you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I gave you the example I use in coffee chats where I give them examples. And sometimes you just have to point to someone and say, hey, Larry, what do you think of that? What do you think about our new products? And one of the things I found work really well is if you've got that diagonal slice I talked about, you go to a finance person and say, so what do you think about the new coffee we came out with last week? And they'll say, well, it's okay. Okay, but what do you mean by that? I think you have to be a little bit pushy yourself, a little bit of pushback there. And then I think I found with the franchisees where I did a lot of presentations, you don't just present, you walk around and you stop by someone and say, what's your name? Talk to them. And it's amazing. They start being alert and sitting up. They're not on their phones all the time. I think it's just down to engagement. And, you know, one of the things that I found during the pandemic at my football club, which is in London, we have employee meetings every week on Zoom. I'm shocked how many comments I get from employees effectively down the organization. Players are in there because we treat players the same as everyone else. They really come up with creative stuff. I think it's your whole approach. And it comes up to just encouraging people to say what the hell they like. I never use my title. I mean, at the football club, I am not the chairman. I'm Nigel. And you have to sometimes reach out and do things to encourage people to break the levels. Every year I bring people over and they stay at my house, you know, some players, some coaches, some other employees. And I think it's the way you act all the time encourages them to be outspoken. And on the franchise side, which for many people are just like customers, it's building that relationship, having some fun, but also making fun of yourself.
So I was going to ask you that a lot of people, probably many people, are not aware of how involved you are with sports and the English football team, especially, you know, the Leyton Orient team that you're, I believe, a co-owner or whatever. How do you compare the management style, leadership with a football team, a football organization with corporate America?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you take an English football team, most of them are run by a chairman who's done good. In other words, he's made a lot of money. And he's put it into the club. Well, I've been fortunate. I put a lot of money into Leyton Orient, especially at the moment. But I think most of them, I've observed, the total autocrats. You have to call them Mr. Gulko, not Larry. I mean, and one of the great things with America, I think first names tend to prevail here. That's one of the first things I noticed. I also think in America there's a positive intent with everything. Back in 1987, I was doing recruitment for Grand Met, and I sat in the lobby in New York, and I noticed that Americans don't just shake hands, they virtually jump to people to shake hands. There's this enthusiasm. enthusiasm, and that doesn't really exist as I see it in staid English clubs. So we're a team that's owned predominantly by American. My main partner's in Texas.
Right.
He did very well at Microsoft. So we've tried to bring the American approach to English football.
Right.
And I think culturally it's worked very well.
Right.
But I don't know if you were going down this route. I mean, it's been a real struggle the last 2 years. Quick story. We bought the club. We had no bank account. We were bankrupt. We had no credit cards. We had like 6 weeks to the start of the season. So it was a bit of a disaster. We bought it because it was run by a guy who I can genuinely say was a bad person.
Yeah.
Mistreated everyone. And then we had to get organized. And within 2 years, we achieved one of our goals to go up a league.
Right.
And then our head coach died 2 weeks later at the age of 49. And this is one of the sad experiences of my life. We were actually here in Wellesley with some players and coaches. And I'm pointing there because we had a meeting around my dining room table to tell the players that Justin had died. I cannot tell you, Larry, the impact that had. For most of these people, average age, say 22, 23, 24, they'd never experienced death in their life, not with someone they knew, but it's made us more resilient. And I think it's helped us handle the pandemic. And there's a lot of podcasts out there at the moment talking about resilience. I truly think that's a theme that is important. And I think our club's got resilience. And like all sports teams, you have ups and downs every week. We played well on Tuesday night, so I'm okay for 2 days, right? And we won. But resilience, I think, is so important. And when I think back at our time at Dunkin, we were pretty resilient. I mean, we're going against McDonald's. We're going against Starbucks. We're going against those convenience stores.
Sure.
I mean, they were nipping away at our coffee business. And again, I think one of the things that's probably been fortunate for us during the pandemic is, do you really want to go to Dunkin where you can stay in your car and get your coffee, or go to a convenience store, get out the car, go inside, pour the coffee with which 20 other people have touched, then have to line up and pay and come out? I mean, it's a miserable experience. Now, I'm biased, I know, but
but plus the quality of the coffee, you have no idea in a convenience store versus Dunkin.
No, I've never had it for a long time, so I don't know how bad it is. So thank you.
All right, last question before we get in my. I want to, Meg. You mentioned you have the poll questions about the iced coffee and the hot coffee.
Yep, that's ready. We can launch that now.
Yeah, let's look at that. Let's see what that says.
It's an interesting comment I'm going to make about one of those points.
And the answer, Meg, or the answers? 44 hot, 21 cold, and depends on the factors of weather. 31%. Neither. I don't like coffee. But it's interesting. No, that 31% I can relate to, because I would never go to Dunkin and get an iced coffee when it's 10 degrees and it's snowing. To me, it's almost like I don't drink soup in the summertime when it's 95 degrees and it's humid. I'm not buying soup. So what do you think of those numbers?
Yeah, I'm slightly surprised on the cold coffee. Perhaps we should have called it iced. I think that may have been a better description, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But you made the point, Larry, about weather. I think back through my career.
Yeah.
What is the biggest determinant of success or failure of most retail brands? And it comes down to weather. Think about Blockbuster. Here's a question that I'll pose to everyone. I want everyone to write down the answer, and you can judge yourself whether you get it right. When I was at Blockbuster, which month was the highest month for revenue in the year?
I would say January.
Okay. Let other people think. I'll give them a few seconds to think.
Okay.
The answer is June.
June.
And that's, by the way, January is the most common answer I get.
Yeah.
And the reason is that the kids come out of school, it's hot outside, air conditioning seems nice, and they just want to sit down and as my kids say at home, chill, right? And they used to have stacks of videos. So okay, next one was Papa John's.
Right.
All driven by the weather as well, particularly when it's bad.
Right.
Dunkin, you summed it up. I mean, at Dunkin, we can predict, and I think this is where AI comes in and is very strong. We can predict by the weather what's going to happen, whether it's going to be ice or hot coffee.
Right.
Probably the biggest example I've got is ServPro. I mean, it's really interesting that ServPro is very driven by the weather, because you only use ServPro, which is, for those who don't know, is the world's biggest remediation company, is if you have a leak or you have a fire. And leaks only normally happen when it's raining.
Right.
So what happens in most companies, and Larry, tell me if you think this is true, don't blame it on the weather, fix it. They see weather as the excuse. I've never believed that. What you need to do is market with the weather. And these days, the weather tools are so strong. And at ServPro, we actually have a full-time meteorologist. And they once sent me all the weather reports for the whole country. I said, don't ever send me that again, because it went on for like 50 pages. But I think if there's one thing that marketeers listening to this should learn, how do you actually market with the weather? And here's an example from Blockbuster. We bought this business in Ireland called Extravision, and 236 stores back in the day. We did a deal with TV stations that we would only go on TV if the precipitation was more than whatever it was.
Right.
The results were the best marketing return on investment I've ever seen.
Oh.
Because when it rained, we advertised. When it didn't rain, we didn't advertise. It was amazing. So I think that little survey hopefully passed on a good lesson to folk.
Maybe when your kids call it chill, maybe you should call it chill coffee instead of iced coffee.
Hey, Larry, you should be in marketing.
Yeah. All right. No, right now, I'm going to do what's called up close and personal, my lightning round, and then we're going to go to the audience Q&A. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Nigel. This is really fast questions. No heavy duty thinking. Right. What's your favorite donut?
Oh, I'm very boring. Glazed.
Glazed. Okay. What is the #1 product sold at Dunkin?
#1. That's a good question. Hot coffee.
Okay. Tell us one thing we don't know about you.
I used to be a disc jockey.
Really?
Yeah, I was a disc. I retired 3 times. I started. So, quick story, which I think the audience will kind of like. Did you ever see the film Pirate Radio?
No.
Okay, so in England, and my teenage years were the 60s, we had the BBC, which actually restricted the number of hours you could listen to pre-recorded music.
Right.
So you had like 1 hour a day.
Right.
And then people invested in these offshore radio stations called like Swinging Radio England, Radio London, Radio Caroline. And they were all outside the 3-mile territorial limits. And we had true American radio for the first time. I was so obsessed with it. When I went to college, I became a disc jockey. I then did mobile DJing for probably 6 years. I kept retiring. And then I came back. And the problem when you come back is you haven't got up-to-date music. So I rebranded myself. Originally, it used to be called Corporate Sound. I then branded myself as the Golden Oldies Disco. So all I had to play was old records.
Okay. What's one piece of advice you would give your 25-year-old self?
I'd say learn from 3 people you know. Do you want me to explain that?
Yeah.
I think you don't need a mentor. You just need to have 3 people who are inspirational. And I can think of a guy called David Tagg, who was the head of HR when I was at Grand Met. He made me obsessed about standards.
Right.
Barry Gibbons, who's well reported in the book, He was my boss at Burger King. He had this slightly off-center humor, and he wrote a great book called "If You Want to Make God Laugh, Show Him a Business Plan." And he had these great phrases, and one I always remember is "Don't put things in a tidy graveyard." And what he meant by that, too many people are looking to tidy everything up. I mean, my wife goes crazy because my office is always untidy. But I think that helps make me more creative.
Right.
So that's just two, but pick on three people.
Right. All right. If you had the opportunity to have dinner with an iconic CEO who you've never met before, who would that be?
Elon Musk.
I had a feeling to say that. I know you have a Tesla. I said he's going to say Musk. I knew it. I really knew it.
Well, no, you're right, because I mean, when they write the history books in 100 years, he'll be right up there, won't he? I mean, this is a guy that's done so many things.
Yeah.
And I know he's at times his behavior is slightly strange, but what a fascinating guy to have dinner with.
Yeah. When you're escaping from the business world, no Dunkin, no boards, whatever, where or what might we find you doing?
Okay, so I'm going to throw Leighton Orient back into the business world, okay, because it was a passion. I've fan for 61 years, but it's more business. So I'm going to say reading about the Miami Dolphins.
Really? I thought you were going to say maybe like hanging out with your daughters playing soccer.
Well, no.
No. All right.
Hey, I think the Patriots are done. So that's the news for you guys. I mean, and the new power in town is the Dolphins.
The thing is, honestly, but you keep saying that. Do you want the audience to keep buying Dunkin' Donuts? Or are you trying to push them away? What are you trying to do with them?
Well, so here's Jonathan Kraft is a very good friend, right?
Yeah.
He's been frustrated over the years that I'm so obsessed with the Dolphins.
Yeah.
And he said, when we hired Brian Flores from the Patriots, he said, "You've finally done something great." And he truly believes Brian Flores is going to be fantastic.
What life experience has had a profound impact on your success?
I think, several.
Yeah.
I mentioned a couple.
Sure. Same price. Sure.
Yeah. So I grew up in an entrepreneurial family.
Yeah.
And when my brother and I were like 12 and 8, my mum and dad had all kinds of businesses, and we once slept above a whole garage of fireworks. Not very safe.
Yeah.
But that's what entrepreneurs do. I think another one is taking a risk coming to America. I always, because of the disc jockeying background, I always wanted to come to America. And it's funny, my wife's from Detroit now. I was obsessed with Motown.
Right.
But, going across the Atlantic has been twice. So it's actually 3 times because I went back once. It's been really great because we speak the same language, but 2 different cultures.
Right.
It's been fantastic. I've only truly ever made money in America. This is a great country, despite some of the things that are going on. So that's been very important.
Okay. If we could rewind the Nigel film, what would you have done differently in your career?
I was too long in HR. I didn't answer your question earlier. I never wanted to be a general manager. I wanted to be the most senior HR person I could. Here I am at 70. I love running things. I love being involved in things. I think I should have done it earlier, but I never thought about it.
Okay, last question. America runs on Dunkin'. What does Nigel run on?
I think I run on
Kit Kat bars.
No. I do like chocolate, and American chocolate really is not very good. My wife and I have this debate. I mean, Cadbury is the greatest chocolate brand in the world.
Yeah.
But no, I like. This is going to sound kind of. I do drink a lot of Dunkin' coffee.
Yeah.
And I also kind of like our sandwiches, but I also like a good English roast meal.
All right. So now the Q&A. Kyra says, "Hello, I'm Kyra, and I'm a senior marketing student from Southern California. It's very exciting to be here. You know, it's interesting. I read a while ago, Nigel, California has not really been a great market for Dunkin'. Why is, in perception or reality, why is California like a different country? Like, it was very hard, or maybe not now it is, I don't know, I'm not sure. Why was California such a hard market to penetrate?
Well, I think originally, well before my time, we went there and then pulled out. That always makes it difficult. But California is doing really well. We're very happy. The pandemic seems to have helped it. Sorry, what was the actual question? We talked about California?
Oh, no, no, she just said thank you for being here in California.
Well, yeah, by the way, my wife's always saying to me, why can't we have a house in California? My answer, it's a long way away.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, another question I'm trying to find. No, I mean, you see, everybody wants to be linked in with you, so that's cool. But I want some questions.
Hold on, here's the deal. They can be linked in as long as they sign up for LeightonOrient.com and become a Leyton Orient fan and follow our games on streaming.
I'm trying to find. Everybody wants.
You ignored that, Larry.
What's that?
You ignored that. Streaming. I mean, this is the way sports clubs survive at the moment.
I know, no, I know. I just want to look at the questions here. I apologize. Everyone just keeps saying, please, great presentation. I'd love to connect with you. Everyone's connect with you. I'm looking for more questions here. Oh, the tagline, America runs on Dunkin'. Did the agency, at that time it was Hill Holiday, come up with it, or was the internal team just curious? I believe it was Hill Holiday, right? Before my time, yeah. But my understanding, it was the agency. Yeah, yeah. And then someone agreed. I have 2 Gen Z kids in my house. They both love Dunkin'. I love Dunkin' Donuts. I also love donuts, especially your glazed stick. I took a screenshot of you, Nigel. I'll send it at the end. Yeah, it was probably me saying the phrase like something like that, right? Okay, no, but hey, I call both ways. But you know, this Q&A says I actually don't like Dunkin' coffee at all. Sorry, I drink a local brand by me called Red Bond, but I do like Dunkin' breakfast sandwiches. Well, so they don't. Those breakfast sandwiches are good. I mean, yeah. I mean, and if you don't want anything too heavy, the wake up wrap has been a big success. You know, I got to admit to you, I was on Route 9 today at 10 o'clock and I was starving. I had a quick little meeting for 10 minutes. I went to Dunkin' on Route 9 near Chestnut Hill, and I got the 2 for $2, the breakfast wake up sandwiches for 2 for $2, and I got iced coffee, and it was great. That 2 for $2, it can't be. I mean, where can you find anything for $2 to fill you up, right? So Larry, you're that value-oriented consumer we've been identifying. That's right. All right, here's a good question. I think getting rid of styrofoam cups was harder for Bostonians to get used to than the Dunkin' name change. I'm curious, how long will it take to transform Storefronts to Dunkin' over Dunkin' Donuts? Almost all the Dunkins around me are still Dunkin' Donuts from the outside signage, except brand new locations. Is it up to a franchisee to do it, or is it a corporate timeline, region by region, based on a remodeling schedule? Okay, a good, well-informed question. I think what I'd say is that we're well on track to do it in a relatively short period. I can't remember the period. Then the pandemic came along. The last thing franchisees wanted to do was to do a lot of remodels because of the cash drain. Right. And if you think about it, and you know, just being serious for a minute, back in March, April, every company was thinking about liquidity. Right. And we were thinking about the liquidity of our franchisees and trying to help them. So remodels was something, given the enormity of the pandemic, we could defer. So I think you'll see that pick up pace. But I think we also have to ask the question, how long is the pandemic going to last? The World Health Organization says 2 more years. Right. I was kind of disappointed with the Massachusetts numbers today, 800 and something. So yeah. Huge. I think we should be concerned. Obviously, we're all hoping for a vaccine. So I think the remodeling will happen when we don't have to worry about cash. But at the same time, I think our franchisees have done a very good job adjusting, as we said earlier. Right. Someone says, great book. Next question for Nigel. How much of the decisions made, whether brand operations or internal communications, due to the pandemic, do you feel will carry over once the pandemic is behind us for Dunkin'?
Well, okay, so let me broaden that from just Dunkin. I think a lot will. I think the drive-through, which we knew was important, is now important on steroids. And you only have to look at some of the lines going through the drive-through. I think curbside we talked about. I think most brands are going to think about, do they need as many items on the menu? And going on to some of our competitors, Burger King, Wendy's, McDonald's, I think they've done a great job at dinner time, because a lot of restaurants have been closed. Sadly, a lot of independent restaurants have gone out of business. So they've filled a spot there. And I think they will keep that. So quick service restaurants, I think, have been a big winner.
Right.
It's interesting. I'm on the board of Advance Auto, and they just launched a big marketing campaign this week, actually, or last week, this week, with Die Hard, Bruce Willis. If you haven't seen it, they're relaunching it with Die Hard is back. We bought last year from Sears, the Die Hard brand. We put it on all our batteries, big campaign. So I think a lot of people are moving to repairing their cars themselves. I'm not going to, because I'm about the least technical person going. So I think behaviors like that will stay. In my regular speeches, I have a statistic that people will work from home 3 times what they did before. I'm chairman of a company called Fooder, which is a disruptor in the food catering business. And we've got numbers that show offices won't get back to, only get back to about 80% of their original level by the end of next year. So I think there's a lot of behaviors for a lot of brands that are going to stay in place for some time. So I think online shopping, e-commerce, call it what you like, is going to be here, and it's going to be so important.
Right.
The losers, I think, are going to be landlords, because a lot of brands are going to go predominantly online. And I think a lot of brands who don't think they should be online should think about how they should be online.
Nigel, what do you think is the best part of the DD Perks loyalty program?
I think it's just the app. I mean, give you an example. I mean, we have a house down on the Cape. I came back here quite a few times in the summer. I used to leave my house, bang my order in. It's all preset. I had a small store without a drive-through, without curbside. Just go in and out. I think it's that convenience really does match the way Americans think, the need to get somewhere quickly. And I think we've got a world-class app.
How are you actually leveraging the metrics of the information utilization with the, this is my question, with the DD Perks?
Well, it's not just done. I think every company is all about personalization. The big trend in marketing right now is personalization.
Right.
The board I'm on is Abercrombie and Fitch, which has done another company. I'm really impressed with what they've done during the pandemic. But they've got a lot of loyalty through their programs, Club Cali with Hollister. And I think you just have to personalize that information to individual consumers. It's something we're doing at our football club even. So personalization of all that data is so critical. And I think one thing, this is something that shocks me about marketing people. Marketing people always talk about average ticket, traffic. The unknown, the word they don't use enough is frequency. So leveraging all that data is about frequency. Now, Dunkin has unbelievable frequency. And I'll always remember bumping into someone who was a contractor, and he was there with his big cup of iced tea, actually. And I said, you like coming to Dunkin'? Love it. And how do you come? Well, I use the app. I don't talk to anyone. I pick it up. How many times a day do you come? 7 times a day.
7?
7. And I said, well, why do you come so often? He said, I'm a contractor. This is my relief. I get out of wherever I'm working. I go to Dunkin'. I refill my coffee. I have a routine. So that's the ultimate in frequency. A Blockbuster, it used to be 2.2 times a month. But marketing people don't seem to talk about frequency. And you know, with other brands, it's probably twice a year.
Yeah.
And I think if I had to give one piece of advice from a non-marketing person to marketing people, is think about how you can drive frequency. You don't need any more customers. If I could make all Dunkin's customers come one more time, that is a triple home run.
It's like saying how to increase the average lifetime value of your customer.
Exactly.
If they're paying $2 a day, how can you make them $4 a day? What can you do to engage them to do more? Whether in the morning's coffee and lunchtime's a sandwich, or 4 o'clock's a latte, whatever it might be. How do you make them more valuable to you? Yeah.
Well,
good.
So yeah, I'll give it the football example.
Yeah.
In the pandemic, streaming is critical, and we've got a world-class streaming service. But for people over here, we already know that once they become Leyton Orient fans in America, they will want to go to London, because it's not going to see Leyton Orient. It's the fact that we are in London. This is one of the greatest cities in the world. You can see the game. And then we've also captured colleges and other youth teams, and we're getting increasing numbers where they talk about going to play over there, giving the kids an educational experience at the same time. And you think you then sell shirts and everything. And you're right, Larry, it's the lifetime value of a customer. It's getting them hooked. And then once they're hooked, there's so much more you can do with it.
Yeah. And that next question is, what are your thoughts about viral marketing? For example, Duncan recently launched the Spicy Ghost Pepper Donuts and took shots at McDonald's and Wendy on Twitter. Would this be a good strategy to build your social media presence?
Yeah, to be honest, I saw that in the paper. I don't really know how we did it, because I think it's a bit of a lesson there that boards shouldn't get involved in stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, my son told me all about it and was all excited about the donut and said it was fantastic. I think you've got to be creative. You've got to take a few risks. And it's in the book. When I was at Papa John's, Domino's had Donald Trump's Apprentice, and they were sponsoring it. We decided to disrupt The Apprentice. So we bought media for an ad right around the country, but we bought it nationally, but at local level. We put this ad together in a week and a half, which doesn't normally happen. We got John Schneider, who at that time was not doing bad things. And we put him in the chair, and he spun around and said to The Apprentice, "You're fired." And that was very disruptive. I think it really got our franchisees behind us. It was a bit of a risk. And I always remember the CEO of Domino's, who I became a good friend of, saying, "That Apprentice ad, something happened there. We lost some momentum."
Oh yeah. You know, the one, if you want to call it brand placement, when I watch America's Got Talent and see all the 5 judges there, and that Dunkin cup is there the entire time, it's pretty cool. So whoever created that opportunity and solidified it, you know, kudos to them or the team.
Yeah, no, that was done internally.
Yeah. Next question. This is a cool question. What do you see as Dunkin's next opportunity?
Oh, where do I start?
We only have 2 more hours before the presidential debate.
Okay, so when I was CEO, I used to talk about we could double our footprint in the US.
Right.
That is basically still the case. We could build another 8,000-9,000 stores. I think we could build more stores with drive-throughs. And what people don't understand about the quick service restaurant industry is you can take a store in a, say, simple kind of dingy end cap. You can move it 200 yards and have a drive-through on a fresh, well-designed store. And by well-designed store, I'll give you an example that's local. Out on Route 9, you just turn off the turning before you get to the mall. And there's a Mercedes dealership up there just before on Route 27, brand new Dunkin, great looking Dunkin. So it's amazing. I've seen stores, and I'm thinking about one example in Florida. This store was doing 17,000. It moved 300 yards. Drive-through. Within 3 weeks, it was doing 47,000 a week.
Wow.
So that's another opportunity. I think continuing to plow like every company. The digital way forward is huge for us, because that's the way consumers take everything on board. I think internationally, Dunkin hasn't done as well as it should have done. I think people should buy the stock, but we did hit an all-time high today.
Here's a great question. What's the next big goal for Nigel? After working with so many incredible companies, what is the next thing you want to accomplish?
Okay, so, well, firstly, I want to see my kids do a successful high school, because we've got a 13, 15-year-old. That's one. And then my wife and I can spend more time in Naples, where we got a home in the winter. So that's a goal. We've got this very clear business plan at Leyton Orient, but like everything's been interrupted by the pandemic.
Yeah.
We want to get promotion from League 2 to League 1. We've got a whole series of goals related to attendance. So, I mean, I'm very focused on all that. I'm, as I said, recently the chair of Surf Pro. I think this is a brand that can do amazing things. Yeah. Spent 3 hours with them today on the strategic plan. So there's some of them. But one of the things I want to say something that's a bit more serious. I think we all need to look after ourselves, and I'm working very hard at that. I mean, there's an article today in the UK newspapers about how the average person in the UK is working out, I think it was like 6 hours less than they used to, or something like that. It was a ridiculous number. I think we all have to take advantage of the fact that many of the people on the call are going to be living past 100. The way you achieve it is by staying very healthy and making sure you invest the time in working out and staying fit. I think is absolutely critical. And
having donuts.
Yeah, and by the way, that's
I'm only chuckling with it.
No, but here's a good story. Andrew Ross Sorkin, I think most people know who he is on Squawk Box. Great guy. I mean, Andrew is, when you get to know him, is exactly as he is on TV.
Yeah.
And he comes up with challenging questions about donuts. But I was on one show where he ate 7. I mean, he really loves them.
Yeah. Some of the statement, I'm a Bostonian living in Colorado. You can always find the native New Englanders here because they can tell you exactly where the closest Dunkin location is. Another person says the grilled cheese sandwich was good for my dinner time. Another person says, as a marketer, as a marketer, it's never about the first sale, it's the follow-up sales. Frequency, Nigel, is important in branding. Give them an excellent experience, and they'll come back for more and more and more. And the last question here is, if you could peek into the future, where do you see Dunkin and Baskin? Wow, in 2030, that's another 10 years from now. But looking through your business lens, even less than that, whatever, where do you see Dunkin and Baskin even 5 to 10 years from now? What trends will happen that could be fundamental changes? What trends could happen that could be either opportunities or threats to either brand?
Okay, so I mean, we got whatever the number is, 21,000 stores globally now between the two brands. When I was CEO for 10 years, we grew 5,800 stores. So I think there's a good chance we can grow 5,000. So let's say that's the first one. I think under Dave's leadership, operational standards have improved, and in the restaurant business, you can never give up on that. That is right. That is task number one. And I think that goes right back to the early days of McDonald's and their ethos. And I will never forget, first time I went into McDonald's, which was in about 1975 in Milton Keynes in the UK. I couldn't believe it. I mean, all those people behind the counter, they were like ants. I mean, there were so many of them. But this industry has been about focusing on making sure that the standards are right. I think digital will be huge. And to prove that point, when I left Blockbuster, one of the things I was determined to do was to make sure wherever I went, didn't lose the digital mojo like they did after my time at Blockbuster. So the first week I was at Papa John's, I noticed that our budget for online pizza ordering was very small. And we only had 5% of the orders at the time that were online. I decided to focus on that. In my 4 years, we took it from 5 to 30. We became the digital leader. Unfortunately, successive management after that lost it, and Domino's took over. So I think, and by the way, pizza ordering for Papa John's, I guess Pizza Hut and Domino's is all about 70% now. So it's gone from 5 to 70%.
Right.
I think that is the future. I mean, Chipotle came out with amazing numbers yesterday. Nearly 50% is online. A chain that is absolutely amazing is Jersey Mike's.
Right.
And, you know, fresh product. And they've got this number that a franchisee told me that 80% of their orders are either online or phoned in. So you go in and again, you pick it up. I mean,
right.
Fantastic. So I think we will be much stronger digitally. Many more stores. I think we will obviously come up with products that none of us can ever think of.
Right.
So it'll be strong. And I think Baskin, if I'm critical of ourselves, I think we could have done more with Baskin. So I think that will become stronger. I think you've always got to look around the corner to your question about threats. I'd worry about eventually we will get over the pandemic. I think vending, which disrupted the coffee business in the UK with Costa Coffee, is an interesting competitive threat.
Right.
There's this strange brand called Luckin Coffee in China, which grew unbelievably. It was really robotized coffee with very little people. Unfortunately, they cooked the books when they went public, but that's not the point. The point is they grew very quickly. I think using automation that could be competitors, so that goes hand in hand with vending.
Right.
But I think our opportunities far exceed the threats. But if you're aware of the threats, you'll be successful.
Yeah. One last question, Nigel. I want to just ask you, I call it purpose-driven brands. I was with about eight months ago, the CEO of Merck, and he was mentioning, if you have no purpose, you have no profits. I'm curious to know, whether it be the football team or Dunkin brands, whatever, what are you doing that's really authentic for a good brand citizen, either giving back to the community? What initiatives, what programs, whether it's first line responders or whether it's just in general, supporting philanthropic endeavors are you doing? Because I believe that after the pandemic, those companies that are quote unquote doing good today are going to be rewarded with loyalty and probably even, like I said, frequency. And so I'm just curious to know what culturally, DNA, and not as a PR stint, but what is Duncan doing? What are some of the things you're involved in that you're really, being, again, a good brand citizen?
Well, I'm not going to just talk about Dunkin. I mean, I'm a major investor in a company called Mod Pizza.
Right.
And they started in Seattle, of all places, and they've gone down the West Coast, around the South.
Right.
There's none around here. The closest ones are Washington. 500 stores, fastest growing fast casual brand. They have an unbelievably strong purpose, and they believe in people. They take prisoners and give them a second chance. That's real purpose. I think Dunkin has got a very long history of giving back. They've got the Joy in Childhood Foundation. Our football club, the only reason we bought the club was football clubs are right at the heart of communities in the UK. So I see it as a community asset. And I think one of the great things of the pandemic is most companies have realized you have to give back. You have to get people on board. And I think it's been a real accelerator in, as you say, purpose-driven brands.
Right, great. Well, Nigel, really, it was great, quote unquote, seeing you. It's been a little while since the pandemic, but it's like Robert De Niro would say, I look forward to seeing you sometime future, having lunch and a coffee. And, the thing I miss about seeing you at Dunkin when you were CEO is when you come in there and they say, oh, Nigel will be with you in 20 minutes. That's okay. You're sitting in the lobby. Every donut is there. Every coffee is there. Every ice cream is there. It's a cool treat to nibble at the lobby and probably gain about 5 pounds, right?
Well, no, but see, Larry, the answer is if you worked out, you can take all that. You need to work out more.
Exactly, because 2/3 is nutrition and 1/3 is working out. But no, thank you. I appreciate your time tonight. I really do. And on behalf of the American Marketing Association, it was a really engaging, insightful conversation. I think we touched upon everything you and I talked about, and I wish you continued success. And again, look forward to seeing you sometime, soon when it's appropriate. But best to your family. Stay healthy, stay strong, stay well, and just I wish you just great success in your future endeavors. And I'm sure we'll be in touch soon.
Well, Larry, thank you very much. And to everyone, thanks for listening. And remember, the best football club for you to support, Leyton Orient, LeytonOrient.com. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Meg, it's now back to you.
Great. Thanks so much, guys. Well, we'll let everyone go. I know we're wrapping at 7:30, but be sure to head to amaboston.org to get your ticket for the holiday party. That's going to be a really fun event coming up, and keep a lookout on the calendar and on social, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thanks again, Nigel and Larry, and have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Good night.